Thanks, everyone, for joining on here. Uh, Michael, to tell you what I'm so excited about today. Um, as you know, I've got a couple of daughters. One of them is an 8-year-old. Whenever I'm riding around with her in the car, she likes to listen to an audiobook. And one of the characters in the audiobook always uses the word ridiculous over and over again. He goes, ridiculous. And all this morning, I've been thinking to myself, we have a ridiculous amount of talent and wisdom on our webinar today. And so a unique drawing together of people that bring so much wealth to this table when it comes to knowledge of the environmental justice movement. And so excited to be with us. Malcolm, can you get us started with some theological framing and reflections as we get going here today?
Absolutely. Brooks, thank you for inviting the guests that we have, and thank you all for agreeing. We are grateful that you are here. As I was sitting back and thinking about this particular webinar and lessons from our sisters that are on the front line, what came to mind was the story of Shiphrah and Puah. In the book of Exodus, you find a story of these two midwives who basically saved the people of Israel, or the Hebrew people, from the boys being destroyed, or the children being destroyed by the oppressive system, because there was environmental justice that was injustice that was taking place, and it had something to do with reproduction rights, and it had something to do with land use, and the way that they wanted to deal with that was to exterminate the people. And these sisters that we have on this particular webinar, and that of Dr. Adrienne Hollis, and that of Heather Toney, and that of Dr. Leslie Fields, and also Jackie Patterson, who will be joining us by phone as well at some point. These sisters are standing as midwives for generations that are to come, for those generations that are being, trying to be, are at present being exterminated due to toxic genocide, due to poor water quality, due to poor air quality, due to fossil fuel industries that are dead set on making profit over people. They stand in the mid, in the gap for us. And we're grateful for them today, and we want to hear all that they have to say. And we look forward to hearing everything that they have to say. Thank you for your time.
Great. Thank you, Michael, for that theological framing. I'm going to introduce our speakers now. First up, we have got Heather McTeer-Toney, who is the National Field Director for Moms Clean Air Force. In 2014, she was appointed by President Barack Obama to serve as the Regional Administrator for the Environmental Protection Agency's Southeast region. She has also served as the first African-American, first female, and youngest mayor of Greenville, Mississippi. She holds a bachelor's degree from Spelman College in Atlanta and a law degree from Tulane University. I always love it when bios offer personal tidbits. She loves triathlons, bacon, and old classic cars. That's a great combination. I'm drawn to the bacon person, but that's great. We're delighted to have Heather with us. We also have with us Leslie Fields, who is the Senior Director of Environmental Justice and Healthy Communities for the Sierra Club. She has over 20 years of federal, state, local, and environmental justice experience in environmental law and policy. And yeah, I've got okay. Yep, I'll be out there in a second. I've got a 4-year-old who's sick and at home, and so she's joining there. But so we've got Fields was, as I said, was Has this wealth of experience. She was appointed by President Obama to serve on the board of directors of the Mickey Leland Urban Air Toxics and Research Center. She serves on the board of the Children's Environmental Health Network, as well as the Adesso African Solutions. She teaches international environmental law as the adjunct law professor at Howard University School of Law, and she is a graduate of Cornell University and Georgetown University Law Center. Up next, we have Adrienne Hollis, who is the lead climate justice analyst for the Union of Concerned Scientists. In that role, she leads the development, design, and implementation of methods for assessing and documenting the health impacts of climate change on communities of color and other traditionally disenfranchised groups. She has an extensive background with a wealth of experience. Notably, she has both a science and a legal background. She is an environmental toxicologist and an environmental attorney. I'm impressed. She's got a PhD in biomedical sciences and a JD. And to top it all off, she has completed postdoctoral studies at Harvard University School of Public Health. And then last but not least, we have Jacqueline Patterson, who is the director of the NAACP Environmental and Climate Justice Program. She has worked as a researcher, program manager, coordinator, advocate, and activist working on women's rights, violence against women, HIV and AIDS, racial justice, economic justice, and environmental justice. I love the titles of her publications because I want to go out and read all of them. Some of the titles are Jobs versus Health and An Unnecessary Dilemma. Climate Change is a Civil Rights Issue. Disasters, Climate Change Uproot Women of Color. Cold-Blooded, Putting Profits Before People. And the People Shall Lead, Centralizing Frontline Community Leadership in the Movement Towards a Sustainable Planet, are relevant directly to our topic for today as we focus on lessons from the front lines. Patterson holds a master's degree in social work from the University of Maryland and a master's degree in public health from Johns Hopkins University. So that is our outstanding lineup. Let's waste no more time. Heather, would you be willing to get us started? Let's see.
Sure, no problem. Hello, everybody, and thank you so much for tuning in, joining, watching this webinar. I have to agree, Reverend Malcolm, you know, this is seriously a superhero group that you pulled together, and I am honored to be here among my sisters who do this work. These are women that I look up to, that I follow immensely and have done so for years. And so I'm just glad to be in the number, as they say. It is truly an honor, and thank you all for hosting this event. You asked us to share lessons from the front line and to get to know us and how we came into this work and sort of our encouragement and motivation of staying in this work, as well as some of the challenges that we've experienced. And, you know, when I thought about that, and Reverend Malcolm, even in your opening statements of sort of being midwives, I reflected immediately on who I think was my midwife bringing me into this work, even when I didn't know I was doing it. And that was Lisa Jackson, who was the administrator for EPA. At the time when I first met Lisa Jackson, I was mayor of Greenville, Mississippi, and had been working on water issues in my community. And I didn't realize that this is the work that I was actually doing. I knew I was doing environmental work, but it wasn't until Lisa Jackson she came to my city, and we were the first stop on her tour across the country of looking at what was happening in communities, small communities across the country. Firsthand. And I remember sitting in the car with her and, you know, she talking to me from an engineering perspective, because she's got an amazing background of environmental engineering and work. And her conversation really began to put to focus the work that I was doing for the people in an environmental lens. And she's like, you know, this is what you're doing, right? And so she then asked me to chair the local government advisory committee for the EPA, and be the person to bring together local elected officials to advise the EPA on how these issues impact communities. And I was all excited. You know, here I am, young Black woman in Mississippi, getting this attention from the federal government. And she said, "Hold on, sister, you don't know what you don't know yet." And she didn't say, "Don't get too excited because you don't know how much work you're about to get into." And she was absolutely right. Because within 2 weeks of taking that appointment, the BP oil spill happened. And so immediately I was thrust into galvanizing other elected officials and encouraging and really pushing EPA to talk to people on the ground and listen to those lessons in making decisions. And so, you know, you're right. It was a midwifing process for me. And I think even now, as I've stayed not only in this struggle from the perspective of government, but now with Moms Clean Air Force and working with non-governmental organizations that need to maintain the voice of the people and understand that being at tables means that you're carrying the voice of the people who need their voices carried. And it's a very, very important task. And it's one that I never forget. And I try to remember wherever I am. So from EPA, being in the local government advisory committee, to then being regional administrator for the entire Southeast, which includes all the red states. But more importantly to me was a lot of environmental justice communities, from Mississippi to Florida to Alabama, a quarter of the nation's population, but also a very, very diverse mix of communities that are dealing with generational environmental concerns and issues. It was still that voice that said you're sitting and you're talking on behalf of the people. It's important to help elevate those folks' voices and to keep the main thing the main thing. Don't ever forget where you come from. So I think about that as, you know, my lesson from the front line is recognizing that these issues of environmental injustices, of climate crisis and disaster, not only have a light on them now, but they have existed for years. There are people who have been in this work for years and just have never had an opportunity to really have their voice shown and elevated, and that was part of my job. I think one of the significant challenges that I've experienced, and I'm sure my fellow panelists can shed some light on this as well, is always being a conscience, you know, always being the consciousness in the room, and making sure that people are always reminded of our moral responsibilities to care for all people and to keep it at the forefront of the conversation, as opposed to getting bogged down in sometimes the very high level technical responses and solutions that don't always include or think about people, and particularly people from vulnerable communities. So I found sometimes that's a challenge, because it can be a burden, but at the same time, I think it's important for us to recognize the gravity of what we've been called and asked to do. I will say it's a joy to be at Moms. This is my first time being in a non-governmental role, and I consider myself a recovering politician. So I really enjoy the opportunity to not have to be held to what the government quote unquote requirements are, and being more free to have conversations about impacts that are happening in communities all over this country. But the other beautiful thing that I really like about Moms, and one of the reasons I was drawn to this organization, was because this is an opportunity to create this synergy from so many diverse perspectives through the lens of mothers. And when I joined Moms, I was actually, at the end of the Obama administration, I had my son. This is my firstborn child. I have two bonus babies, but the first one I gave birth to. I had him right at the end of the administration. And so I was actually living some of these environmental impacts of people. I'd worked with moms who were farm workers in Florida who, were dealing with toxic pesticides. I was there in Birmingham and, in the North Birmingham area and visiting those communities. But now I was pregnant woman who had to be very careful about what I was breathing. I was familiar and I felt differently about Flint, which happened right in the midst of while I was nursing, to understand what the real feeling it was to not trust the water, that very precious breast milk I was passing on to my child, what that felt like. So I was feeling it different. And I think it just really connected with me that Moms was connecting with all of these mothers from so many different backgrounds, but united in the one thing of making sure that we were protecting our children, no matter where they came from, no matter what they look like, from these harmful dangers of air pollution and climate. So that really resonated with me. It does now to this day. And I'm so grateful that we have an opportunity to really share and expand that message in a more diverse way. So I'm going to stop there and throw it back over to you, Brooks, and I look forward to engage in conversation and questions.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Heather, for that powerful reflection that you've given us. We are now going to transition to Leslie Fields. Leslie, if you could.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. And I really appreciate this opportunity to be part of this superstar all-women panel. It's really exciting, and I've been looking forward to this all week. And I want to thank everyone involved, and I want to thank Dr. Burnt and also Reverend Malcolm and Reverend Brooks and my fellow panelists, who I hold in the highest esteem and regard and admire them very, very much. And I also thank you, Heather, for that great opening, your hard act to follow. But I appreciate this time to just, have some reflections. And I really feel very blessed and privileged to be able to do this work. And I'm with the Sierra Club, as has been stated. We are the largest and oldest mainstream environmental organization. We have 63 chapters around the country, including Puerto Rico. And we've also, I'm proud to say, been doing environmental justice since the early 90s. And so I've been here 12 years, and it's been 12 never a dull moment years. And I'm also a practicing Catholic. And I'm a member of Holy Comfort of St. Cyprian Church in Washington, D.C. And I've been a Catholic all my life, but I've always kind of, when it came to the environmental justice, I've been involved for over 20 years, as been stated. And I started out actually really doing it with NAACP when I was living in Texas and volunteering for the state chapter of the Texas state chapter of the NAACP. And the state chapter president, his name is Gary Bledsoe. He's still the state chapter president. He's on the national board. And 25 years ago, we were the young guns, and the young guard, and he'd throw us out, and every weekend we would go out. And I drove all over Region 6, Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, New Mexico, and Louisiana, and on issues that our chapters were dealing with. And I drove out one time to Midland, Odessa from Austin, which is where I was living, and taped the map to the dashboard and put a magic marker where I needed to go. And young people now are horrified because this is before GPS. And I got to a place in Odessa where on the crossroads of I-10, and there was a Dynagen, a synthetic rubber plant next to a small school of Black and Latino kids. And I got out of the car coughing and gagging, and I really started my career doing school citing cases because I just couldn't believe where our kids were had to go to school. All over the country and all over that region. There's schools next to synthetic rubber plants and refineries and lead smelters and highways. And it's still happening. It's just outrageous. And so on toxic dumps. And so that's how I got started. I also was working in farm worker advocacy a little bit while I was in law school, and making those connections around the pesticide poisoning and the women working in maquiladores on the Texas border, and the exposure of birth defects and their kids having birth defects. So it's been, I really feel that environmental justice is the vanguard of the environmental movement. It's global. It's taken me all over the world. The same industries are, that are bedeviling the same communities all over the world, and the common denominator are that they're black and brown. There's no difference between the Niger Delta and the Louisiana Delta. They're same companies, Shell, BP, Egypt, all those international corporations. So they're constantly spilling and leaking and catching on fire, and they're spilling and leaking as we speak in these gulfs and all these other areas. And so I have been very lucky to be involved, and as has been stated, the best solutions come from the communities, and I see it as my job to lift that up and make sure that that they are respected and that they are promoted and that they are enforced. And it's like I said, I'm a practicing Catholic, and I kind of was in the closet about it until about 5 years ago when Pope Francis came out with his encyclical Laudato Si, and then all of a sudden, it was just wonderful that the Catholic Church was actually had been involved in stewardship, but he really connected the issues of poverty and environmental stewardship and the health of the planet and the health of the people in a really powerful way. And I still reread it. It's very well written. It's actually it's like a little bunch of sonnets, and I still really enjoy reading it. And I also am inspired by so many of the people I've been able to work with. And I think what resonates for me is my favorite chapter in the Sierra Club is our Puerto Rico chapter, because they connect everything to culture and to love and to preserving the natural and the cultural and spiritual environment. And this can be very, very joyous work, and it should be joyous work. And so when you protect the natural environment, you're also protecting people's cultures, and you're protecting their spirituality. And I've been privileged to see that in many other places too, working with our colleagues on the Navajo Reservation and their spiritual practices around protecting their water and facing up to, generations of uranium mining pollution. That is something that has always resonated for me. The challenges have been working in a predominantly white organization, and also hasn't been easy, but I'm proud to say our Sierra Club is committed to equity and inclusion in a huge way now, putting a lot of resources to it and investing in it and making sure that it's infused within the organization. And so I'm really proud that work is being done. And also, but it has been challenging because we were founded in 1892. So what happened we're really just a microcosm of the rest of society. And so they had white supremacist roots as well. And we were, grappling with that legacy. And, but I think that what's important is that there's so many ways to get involved. And that's what I love about environmental justice, is that you can be a professional, you can be a student, you can be an abuela, a grandmama, and you can get involved any kind of way and just about protecting your community. And that's what's really wonderful. And you don't have to formally join an organization. All you have to do is care. It could be just nurturing your garden and nurturing your children, nurturing your community. And it's got, we really are in a crisis right now with climate change and it exacerbating all existing inequalities. And so everybody should get involved. Everybody can enjoy what they do in this, and whether you're an artist, whether you're a athlete. I mean, that's what's so wonderful. It's complicated and messy, but you can really still be involved. And the congregations that are involved, it's very, very important work that the faith community be involved in terms of from every level, from greening their churches up to voting their proxies when it comes to shareholder meetings and everything in between. There's so many ways for congregations to get involved of all faiths. And I'll stop there and look forward to the discussion. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Leslie. That was terrific. And I appreciate the background and knowledge you bring from the Sierra Club. We'll now transfer to Jacqueline Patterson, who I will bring online for us. And just give me a second here.
Thank you so much. It is truly an honor to be here with you all. Thank you so much to Reverend Brooks and to Reverend Malcolm for organizing this conversation. And I'm just honored, as everyone has said, to be on with these awesome sisters who continue to inspire me with with the words on this call, as well as with the great work that they do. So I feel like in honored company. So thank you all. So I guess I'll start with a few words of background, and then I'll probably start with challenges and then end in motivation. So I don't end on a grim note, but in terms of my background, I was born on the south side of Chicago, and unbeknownst to me at that time, or unreally aware, not lack of awareness really, was I was nestled between three of the coal-fired power plants that got the worst ratings in our top 10 worst plants in the country out of our cold-blooded report: the Fisk plant, the Crawford plant, and the State Line plant in Hammond, Indiana. So I was born squarely in an EJ community, and not too far away from a landfill, not to mention the near roadway air pollution that impacted that area. So again, just without awareness, only now retrospective awareness of all the kids in our school who had asthma, all the folks in the church who were on respirators and so forth. And now kind of viewing all of that in context has been quite enlightening and grounding in terms of this work. I was born to, my mom was from Mississippi, so she came up to Chicago through the, I'll put it in quotes so you can't see, Great Migration. And my dad was from Jamaica. And so with my dad being from Jamaica meant that our childhood was spent between Chicago and often going back to Jamaica where he was from. And really, whether it's in Chicago, where he was very, very insistent upon us being outside and taking us to parks and exposing us to nature, because nature was such an integral part of his upbringing. And then being in Jamaica also, where just the sheer beauty and healing properties of the water and the culture there were such an integral part of my childhood. Again, something I kind of took for granted during that time, but now is a lot more consciously a part of my life and healing practices, even for myself. So that was interesting, kind of in terms of beginnings that were part of my formation that I wasn't necessarily 100% aware of. Fast forward, well, not fast too far forward, but then I ended up serving in Jamaica in Peace Corps. And this is where you even start to see some of the relationships as well. I was in Peace Corps in Jamaica because they decided that I would be able to survive Jamaica, because Jamaica has a high rate of attrition. A lot of people who go into Peace Corps there and drop out. And then we start to see all these interconnections that Leslie was referring to in terms of, imperialism and capitalism and globalization and so forth, and how it's affecting these various nations and its impacts on society and so forth. So the very thing that brought me there were some of the very social ills that are part and parcel of this whole climate crisis. And so I was in Jamaica, and incidentally, my first primary project was working with serving teachers who were doing special ed training. But my secondary project ended up happening because I was living in a community where the water supply was contaminated by Shell oil. And it was my first exposure to this David and Goliath relationship between EJ communities and large corporations. And that was kind of the beginning of my understanding of the activist side of this work. And then most recently, or not most recently, but a little bit before I joined the NAACP, as I was ending one position, actually doing international faith-based work on health and human rights, I ended up going in and volunteering for 6 weeks in the post-Katrina situation, and there really seeing the impacts of disasters on our communities. So all of that was kind of motivating and grounding, and through another series of interconnected steps led me to where I am today. So now that I've eaten up a whole 5 minutes of my 7 minutes, I'll quickly rush you through in the last 2 minutes or so the challenges and the motivations. I would say my top 3 challenges are, one, just expectations, unmanageable expectations of myself and by others. Just last night, I was accosted by someone who has really appointed himself to be my personal troll at a event that I was speaking at, and he literally vowed to stalk me wherever he can find me and expose me for the fraud that I am because I'm not doing what he needs for his communities. And even though I say that somewhat because I'm still in a post-traumatic situation with that, but part of it is when I say my expectations and others' expectations is the reality of what he's facing and the pain that he's facing and the trauma of being in each one of the many EJ communities that are proliferated across this nation because of the very dynamics that others have spoken about. And yes, he's made me the target of his anger and disappointment and hurt because I'm not doing what he wants me to do. But it's really, again, a symptom of the larger issue of the many communities that are in trauma and are in pain. And my challenge is trying to figure out how best placed I am in this larger movement to use where I am to do the best that I can in that work. And so just in the 1 minute remaining, I'll fast forward to what motivates me, and that is the various communities that I work with across the country that are literally making $1 out of 15 cents in terms of just managing to advance amazing gains in the midst of such hardship, and really building power and taking action and making change for their communities, and also being an example to others. And there's too many to name, but those are the communities that really inspire me and motivate me to really take heart from what they're doing and share what they're doing with other communities that are in the beginning stages of trying to figure out their way. And then I'll end by saying, in terms of what faith-based communities can do, I do a lot of work with United Methodist Women and with other faith-based organizations. And I think what Leslie was talking about the Laudato Si is really that really being that voice of calling for a moral frame on climate change, and as the Pope has done, being very specific, and as a United Methodist Women and others are beginning to do, being very specific about, like, yes, the climate change is a moral issue, and not only that, but here's exactly what we need to be doing, as opposed to kind of a broader, like, we need to do something, and then we find folks engaging in false solutions. So really applying that discernment that we need to, that discerning lens to what the real solutions are that are community led and sustainable. So I'm going to hand off to my dear sister Adrienne, and thank you.
Thank you, Jackie. And now we will turn to our final panelist, Adrienne. Take it away.
So thank you. First of all, thank you guys for having me and having us. And I'm so excited to be here with these powerful women, Black Girl Magic, in the house. I have to to say that being last sucks because they're hard acts to follow, but I will do my best. So one thing I have in common, it appears with a lot of people, a lot of us here, is that I too grew up in the South. I grew up in Mobile, Alabama, although I was born in Detroit, Michigan. So I have to shout out Detroit. My earliest recollection of issues around contamination, I grew up in, poor and in the smelling range of the paper mill. And, we were told that that rotten egg smell was the way money was the way money smelled, so that we shouldn't complain. And I was telling this story recently that I remember my mom had bought me a white two-piece bathing suit because we didn't call them bikinis when you're a little girl. And there were only certain beaches that we could really go to near Mobile. And I remember getting in the water and maybe not even an hour later getting out, and there was this huge streak of oil across my swimsuit. And so it was never white again, no matter how much we tried to get it out. And that's the kind of water that we had to swim in, So between that and just this general smell, I feel like I can relate on some level. Although when I was young, I did not know that this is where I would be. So I'm going to skip ahead to my first interaction, I think, with any sort of environmental justice activity was when I was at Harvard with Dr. Joe Brain, and my project was to look at cigarette advertising in Black communities versus white communities. And what I noticed was that in the Black communities, the target was the young people. And so the billboards were at eye level, and the message was, hey, if you smoke, you'll be cool. And in the other communities, they were above the road level, so you didn't see it that often, and it was really sort of like one person, like the Marlboro Man or something. So it was a different message and a different audience that the cigarette companies were targeting. And I remember presenting that at a meeting in Atlanta, and shortly after that, I did move to Atlanta and work for the federal government, the Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry. When I started working, working around community issues. And I remember going to the first National People of Color Summit, and I wasn't at the signing of the Executive Order 12898, but just being in that space, once I realized just how impactful it was, was very moving for me. And I was afraid, and I didn't know where I could fit in, and I wanted to be a part of it. So I just started looking, to see what I can do. And I remember leaving the government to work in academia so that I could work with communities. And I still, am in touch with them. I remember Dr. Mildred McLean in the Harambe House told me that communities needed lawyers who looked like them, who understood their issues and who could explain things to them that were presented to them in more legal terms that they couldn't explain. And shortly after that, maybe not shortly, but a few years after that, I went to law school and thought I was going to come back and be the legal Aaron Brockovich. But 10 years later, I ended up back in the environmental field. So it took me 10 years to get back to the space. But I still, I count that as my first real, foray into this environment. So, what's it been like? It's been, as I think Jack and others have said, it's been challenging, but I see that it's different than it used to be as far as being more of a welcoming space. Some things, however, never change. Funding never changes, or the lack thereof never changes. And, a lot of people, like there are a lot of powerful, there are guys who work in this space. I just happen to know more women. And a lot of everybody, I don't know one that does not need financial support for the work that they do. I do know some who won't pay their mortgage, but instead will take that money to keep their doors open. And I also know that the funding isn't there. A lot of people who want to step out and do impactful work in the community are afraid to, because they don't think that the money is there. So that's a real challenge, giving people what they need and doing what they need. And I feel like, what keeps me motivated, I've sort of like just self-described myself as a connector. So I'll push somebody out in a space where that they need to be in, but they may not have traditionally been recognized as deserving a space, which is that's another conversation. But because everybody is a stakeholder, but I have no problem reaching out, reaching back, reaching up, wherever, and putting people in the limelight. That's sort of what I feel like that's what I do, is give people make sure that they have the platform that they need in order to impart the information that they need to get, you know, and do education and outreach and all of those sorts of activities. What keeps me motivated, again, is, you know, I have to say, and I know people will say this, the young people are motivating me. But, and I say but because environmental justice communities have been doing this work for a long time. And I'm always hesitant to say that because I don't want people to take it the wrong way, to say that I'm negating the work that the youth are doing, because I'm not. It is so impactful, and you know, they have my ultimate respect and regard. I just am happy that they recognize that this work has been done by others. They just weren't as successful for a variety of different reasons, which we won't get into now. But I do know that I've spoken with people, young people, who say, we need to learn from the elders or learn from people who've done this. And I appreciate that they respect that history, that my elders and people that I now work with, you know, that historical knowledge is powerful. And so, because my working premise is that we do better together. Together we can accomplish everything and we can conquer the world, but separate and apart, we're competing. And when we compete, we lose. And so I'm all about non-traditional partnerships and bringing groups together, age, conservation organizations, environmental justice, because we're all fighting for one thing, and that's to save ourselves and save the planet. I think the final question, I don't know how much time I have, is what can the church do, or how can the church be impactful? I have to say that, you know, I'm Catholic also, but I remember when I was in Catholic church in Jackson, in Tallahassee, and there was in the bulletin an announcement for an environmental justice meeting, and I got really excited. And when I went there, they were talking about literally the birds and the bees. And I remember thinking, this is not environmental justice as I know it, you know, and I got up and said that. And I think that the church has come a long way. And I was speaking with my uncle, who's an Episcopalian priest, and he was like, how do you get people involved from the church perspective? But my thinking is the church is the cornerstone for a lot of people, you know? And when the church says something, people listen. And so I think that partnership is strong. I already see that things have been happening, impactful things. So I think that that's a partnership we need, you know, because that's a population, that's another way, the most important way to reach a population. So I'm excited about partnering with the different people that I have in the church family, and I'm you know, looking forward to us just doing some great work together.
Thank you so much, Adrienne. All those reflections were powerful. Blessed that we're able to have this and to be able to record it for others. Those of you in the audience, this is your chance to ask questions. There's a Q&A icon on the bottom of your screen where you can type in a question for any of our panelists. While I give you the opportunity to do that, I'll kind of just throw something out there for any of our panelists to address. You know, I know from your resumes that all of you have had experiences in more than one presidential administration. And so I'm wondering, as we go from administration to administration, as we're in this present moment with the Trump administration, what are you thinking in terms of the most effective strategies in our current climate? Where can we see and affect change? What should we be doing and thinking in terms of policy? What are your thoughts on this present moment and the kind of the best ways to proceed and to go forward?
I guess I'll go first. My first thought is we have a lot of work to do in after the next election. A lot of things to put back in place to protect people, to protect communities and groups of people. And just the amount of activities the amount of work that we need to do is mind-boggling. But I also think that all the groups who've come together, groups I didn't even know existed, makes me feel like we can do it, And so I think that we need to focus on the issues at hand. We can't deal with hate. We can't deal with race baiting. We can't deal with any of that. We have to deal with what we need to do to protect ourselves and our fellow people who live on this planet. And I think if we do that, we're going to be extremely successful.
Great, thank you.
I'll agree. Definitely, without a doubt, Adrian, you are absolutely on point. And I was just having this conversation with some of our team members too, because, we're thinking, how do we break through this ceiling of noise right now in the administration? There's so much that's happening that people are going in 50 million directions because the administration is creating that much distraction from these critical issues that we're facing right now. And I think it is incumbent upon us to remember how important the church is in people's everyday lives. I presented at the National Baptist Convention. Moms was there at their annual conference in New Orleans. And one of my colleagues, she was talking to one of the members of the Women's Auxiliary. And I heard her say, and I said later on in my larger speech, she said, the church is the house of truth. People, they've got fake things happening and fake news, but they go to church to rely on the truth. They trust their pastor. They trust their Sunday school teacher. They trust the mother's board. And we have to really tap into the church's just unique ability in this particular time to garner the attention of people to hear the truth. And if we can bridge the gap that some spaces of faith have, not all, but some of that have in terms of connecting climate and environmental justice to truth, I think it will get us a long way in breaking through the noise of the administration and put us on a good path to make those very swift changes that we're going to need to make with a new administration.
Thank you. Thank you. I like the highlighting of the church's prophetic role as a house of truth. That's a nice way of putting it. Before our next question, any other comments? You got something, Michael?
Yeah, actually, I've got a question. I guess I can ask this to Dr. Leslie Fields. Leslie, how does your organization work with faith communities? And I guess after I ask Leslie this, I can add, everybody else can answer as well. But I just want to know, how does your organization in particular work with faith communities?
That's a great question, Dr. Malcolm, Reverend Malcolm. Yeah, thank you. Well, we work with faith communities in different coalitions. And as you know, we've worked very closely with the Justice First Coalition, and we work very closely in coalition with the different Interfaith Power and Light state groups such as yours. And we've worked a lot in Minnesota, and in working with them in Virginia. And so we work in coalition, and that's the best way. And so we try to be on as equal footing as possible. And, Adrian's absolutely right. A real problem with and a challenge in this work is the resources and the funding discrimination. And so we are trying to work to make sure that the funders understand that these very critical faith groups, community groups, environmental justice groups really need equivalent resources, not some resources, but equivalent resources as the mainstream groups get, not what I call colored people money. And so but the coalition work, we don't do anything by ourselves. And the coalition work is critical and crucial. And it's also, we learn so much being in coalition and being in community.
So, Dr. Fields, you brought up the Justice First tour, and I want to make sure that people understand what that was, so they don't walk away just hearing that and not know exactly what that was. Could you explain to them what the Justice First tour was and is?
Well, okay, yeah. It's a coalition of community folks and faith groups and activists who've been going through the South, particularly, and basically having to me, it's like revivals regarding environmental justice. I know I've had tours in different capital cities in the South, so they work on, they bring up legislation, they bring up policies to the legislators in the capital cities, and like in Columbia, South Carolina, and Raleigh, North Carolina, and in Atlanta. And so I think it's been a very effective and powerful way to get maximum exposure to the policies, and also lift up the solutions, and also demand enforcement. We have the laws, but they're not being enforced in the communities that need them the most.
Heather, I'd love for you to answer that same question, because I know that your organization does great work with communities of faith. What exactly are you all doing with communities of faith as well?
Yeah, thank you for that. Yes, Moms has worked for a long time with United Methodist Women, and they have been an amazing organization to really embrace the faith position on climate and spread that message. And then recently we have developed a Bible study for the African American faith-based community called Breath of Life, and it's through our Community RX program. We really thought long and hard about the issues around environmental justice, but also recognize there's so many people who are already in this space and doing that work. We want to respect that and partner with them. And our area of focus is health issues with children, the environmental impacts of that. So Community RX is our environmental health justice, ensuring, that when we're talking about children and the health impacts to children, we could discuss that from an EJ perspective, and then talk about it from the community of faith. I am non-denominational Christian and have been, was actually born and raised in Mississippi in the Baptist tradition, and still connect with that tradition to my core. I joke with my friends that I want to be a church mother when I grow up. I really, really that's what I believe my calling is. But I say that tongue in cheek, because I really believe that the mothers of the church are where people, again, go to and rely on their truth. And at Moms, we really thought about that, the way that it connects with our message, and the way that we could work with the matriarchal system within the church. And that's what we do with the Breath of Life Bible study. I can tell you, we went to New Orleans. We took, I believe, 1,000 Bible studies. I know we did not leave with, we may have left with 100, possibly. But, if you're in a room of 3,000 mothers boards, women's auxiliary members from the National Baptist Convention, you know that you're going to hand them what they ask for swiftly, and are going to be yes and amen. So yes, ma'am, and amen. Forgive me. So that's our work, and it's really taken off. We're still in the beginning stages of it, but I agree with the other panelists that it's important that this type of work be funded, quite frankly. And I saw one of the messages that one of the questions that actually was in the chat. I think someone was asking, how do you reconcile working with traditional environmental groups who get a lot of funding and don't always work from an EJ perspective? I found that it's important to be on the inside at some of these tables so that you can influence that funding to go to places that are having an impact from an environmental justice perspective, but that we're also sharing and teaching in this conversation, not just being at the table, but talking about why it's important to connect and to stay at the table, why it's important to invest in these types of resources and the returns that come back from them. Just inclusiveness has such a huge return factor that I think a lot of EJ traditional groups have missed out on. And they're recognizing now that we have to do this work together. So that's the work we're doing, and hopefully an answer to somebody's question as well.
And I'd love to hear from Jackie Patterson as well as Dr. Hollis. And I want to synthesize this question because we've got quite a few questions that have been asked. One of them, Heather, you touched on, but another one that could be synthesized is you've got people that are new to this profession or this field, as well as some people that have been in it that are people of color. And what are some of the successes that you've been able to, or tips for success that you can give, as well as some of the tips to avoid some of the pitfalls that are out there as well? And that's for, I was asked for Jackie and Dr. Hollis, but whomever wants to jump in, hey.
No, I was waiting to see if Jackie was gonna jump in. I don't know if she's still here, but I'll start.
I am.
Okay.
Oh, good. Thank you.
Oh, you go.
Oh, no, I was waiting for you to go. Thank you very much.
Well, okay.
Yeah.
Well, you know what? I want to just clarify something right quick, Reverend Malcolm. When we talk about the churches and everything, I want us, because we all work in them. I just want to put it out there that we also work with our indigenous peoples, because that is also spirituality. In that regard, and that is just as important. Actually, maybe even more so, in that they were, our indigenous brothers and sisters were giving us the message a long time ago about what we were doing to our planet, And so I just want to recognize that. And as far as answering the question about things to advice for younger people, young people of color professionals, I have one piece of advice, going to be very short. You can't follow anybody else's path, because I guarantee you the four of us on this webinar came from four different, all of us came from different perspectives. And so there is no pattern, there is no procedure, there is no guideline. You do what makes sense for you. Because the way I came at this, I got my law degree later in life, because it made sense to me to do things that I want to do. But you have to create your own path, and you cannot follow anybody else. But you do learn from other people. You listen to those who've been doing this work, as I do, as we all do, because you don't want to make that same mistake. And there are a lot of lessons out there that people are willing to share with you. You just have to be open to learning, I guess. Turn it over, Jackie.
Thank you very much. I think that is that's very smart advice, and I know we're at time here, so I will just echo that sentiment, and also I would just say that we always need to stay heart-centered in this work, because, just because too often, whether it's funder-driven or otherwise, this kind of nonprofit industrial complex, that sometimes we can program ourselves out of remembering the heart of this work, and of ourselves, and of the people that we're in community with. So I would say much more, but we are at 11:01, or whatever time it is on your side. 2:01, I guess. Thank you.
Hi, this is Leslie. Can I add something, please?
Go for it.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. Thank you all. I just wanted to bring up, I also wanted to, lift up that, what Jackie mentioned earlier, that people face a lot of intimidation and communities face a lot of hardship doing this work. And I think I'm hoping that we can follow up with Miss Jackie and figure out a way to help her with this situation that she talked about, because it's very serious, and we should take these things very seriously when we hear about our colleagues in communities who are getting harassed and people are trying to intimidate them for trying to protect their communities and promote environmental justice.
Hey, this is I could not agree with that more. In fact, Jackie, when you were talking about it, like, man, I've been there. When people think that you can, because you're the only Black or brown face in the room, they think that you are the person who should be able to solve all the problems immediately. And it's hard, it is very, very difficult. So because we're all on this call with faith-based community and people, the first thing I ask is that everybody, of course, pray. But also, I believe that prayer without works is dead. Faith without works is dead. Both prayer and faith without works is dead. And that, we do things like follow each other on Twitter and Facebook. And when you see people who are trolling, that you step in and say something. And, whenever we're around at each other at events, trying to make sure that we're always connecting with one another, which is stuff I know we do anyway. I'm always happy to see Adrienne somewhere. I go hug her neck, or, talking with Jackie or Leslie, because this connectivity, it's also a protection that we have to really circle ourselves around. So thank you for raising that, Leslie, and Jackie, I got you wherever you are.
That's
what's up. Jackie, you point them out, and I got them here. I ain't that far from Damascus Road.
All right now.
Listen, thank you all. Again, I am a huge fan of each and every one of you all, and each and every one of you all speaking to my life personally and help to nurture me in this work. And I am so, so very much appreciative. And thank you, and thank you again. Brooks, I'll turn it over to you now to close us out.
No, I think this is just lots of gratitude for this rich conversation, all of the wisdom that's come to us, and we will put together the resources that have been shared in the chat box, things that have been shared in your remarks. We'll put them together in an email, send them out to everybody who are registered for this, and we'll also send out a YouTube link for people who weren't able to join this. And I know this will live on in cyberspace, and so people will continue to get the blessings that you have shared through your knowledge and wisdom. So thank you to each of our 4 panelists. I almost don't want the time to end because it's been so good, but all good things must come to an end. We thank you so much. To everybody else, I'll let you know that our next Creation Justice webinar will be focused on what is a just transition, and we'll be focusing from a labor perspective for that webinar. So that will be coming up next month. So thank you again, everybody, and we are delighted and thankful ever so much for our panelists. Bye, everyone.